Okay, we got Julian Shabazz up. Julian, what's going on?
Greetings and salutations, gang. I'm ecstatic to be on the show.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad to have you on the show. And
Hey,
we're going
Brian.
to
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
we're going to talk a little bit about African Americans in pro wrestling, and you probably know this, but I guess does your book? I mean, actually, I read pretty much most of your book, and you talk originally about like Vito Small, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, let me tell everyone about Vito Small because I'm sure almost nobody listening knows who Vito Small is, but he was actually a pioneer of professional wrestling back in the 1800s.
Right. Right. Well, Dave, before I say anything, let me just preface that I would not be here if it were not for the work that you and so many others have done over the years. You took a lot of heat. You broke the wall down, to paraphrase Chris Jericho's theme, in terms of allowing outsiders like myself to come in and write about professional wrestling. So I have nothing but praise for you on that point. Now, Vero Small, I'm sorry, you're quite welcome. Vero Small was actually from my home state, South Carolina. He was an ex-slave who began his wrestling career in 1881. He was an ex-slave from Beaufort, South Carolina, who traveled back and forth to New York. He was a really affable individual from what I understand, and a lot of the people liked him there, and he was working as a Pullman porter, if you will. And one time, a professional wrestler did not show up for one of the shows where Vero was unloading the train cars. And so he was a pretty big guy. They asked him if he'd be willing to fill in for the guy. He lost the match, obviously, but a professional wrestler out of Vermont named Mike Horrigan, a white guy, saw him. This was April of 1881. And he saw him, and he took him on the road with him. Vero Small is the first black professional wrestler that I'm aware of. And he began his career in 1881.
Now, over the years, let's talk about the first, so a lot of listeners of this show and modern, not just wrestling fans, but sports fans in general, the plight of the black athlete, I mean, it's if you look back historically, you look back and you go, I mean, how in this country, or any country for that matter, did things that happened, I mean, as late as, the 50s, and probably even after the 50s in some cases, but certainly in regular sports, whether it was, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball was most publicized. I mean, you couldn't actually be in those sports at the Major League level if you were African American. And in pro wrestling, I mean, what was, I'm trying to think of like where black stars first got started. I mean, I know that there were places, because even in the days of Bobo Brazil, there were places where he couldn't wrestle a white wrestler. He could only wrestle black wrestlers. And then there were some places where he wasn't, were some circuits that would not book him, even though he was a superstar. And what was the plight like in different parts of the country, as far as like people getting in? Because it wasn't that many years ago, I mean, where, to be black was like a gimmick in wrestling. In fact, it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that it's not.
I like the way you worded that, Dave. That's the truth. I never thought about it like that, but you're absolutely right. In so many parts of the country, particularly in the South, in the Midwest, in various parts of the country, black wrestlers absolutely could not wrestle against white competitors. Absolutely not. Promoters just flat out would not book black wrestlers. In some places. Now, California was known for having a lot of interracial matches because it just wasn't, they didn't seem to have the same hang-ups in California on the West Coast that people over in the South seem to have, and as well as in the heartland of America, the Midwest and places like that. But Woody Strode, who was instrumental in integrating professional football, the modern era of professional football, as well as being a pioneer in professional wrestling, as well as being a black pioneer in Hollywood, in the films. Woody Strode tells the story of once when he was wrestling in Texas. He was actually wrestling against a white guy, and at that time, black wrestlers could only be baby faces. Absolutely, they would not let black wrestlers be heels. No way. Promoters feared that there would be a riot if a black guy was a heel and he was beating up on a local white fan favorite. But Woody said he was wrestling in the 1940s in Texas, and he noticed at some point during the match that the referee was carrying a blackjack and a pistol. And at the end of the match, yes, a blackjack and a pistol. At the end of the match, he found out from the referee that the blackjack and the pistol was for his protection. They were afraid that those rowdy Texans would attack him, even though he was a babyface. So this was the kind of attitude that promoters dealt with. Even in 1960, Bearcat Wright had a long program going with Walter Killer Kowalski. You know that guy. And Killer drew money in many places. And Bearcat and Killer were drawing money with this great feud they had. They went over to Indiana to take that feud there, and the promoters would not allow integrated matches in Indiana. So Bearcat Wright, after his match, he stood up in the middle of the ring and said, this was 1960, he would never wrestle in a segregated ring again. He was banned by the State Athletic Commission. The NAACP came out in support of him, and in 1961, he became the first black wrestler to hold a version of the world title when he won it in Tony Santos' promotion in New England. But here, Bearcat Wright really wasn't fighting for racism as much as he was fighting for his place on the card. You know, here he was a main event feud in one state, and you go to the next state and you can't do it because of your skin color. So it was very good the way you put that. Blackness had been seen as a gimmick, if you will.
One of my friends growing up who lived in Atlanta in the 60s said that that they felt that pro wrestling actually was, I'm sure how he would put it, but it was probably the most, from a fan standpoint, the most integrated of sports, the Atlanta City Auditorium Wrestling, because they could have, and they had black wrestlers, they had Mexican wrestlers, the Torres brothers, and they had white wrestlers, and they were, and it didn't matter what color they were. He said, like, it was like a place where, and this sounds so silly that we even bring it up because it would be so obvious today, but in those days it was so rare that an audience could be half black, half white, and all cheering for a black babyface, and with no regard for their skin color.
Right.
Whereas he said, like in other sports, even in the 60s, I mean, when you had, even like in Atlanta with Hank Aaron, who was, superstar baseball player, one of the all-time greats, said that like a lot of the white fans were, not that they booed Hank Aaron, but he never really was cheered and accepted in the Atlanta community, at least at that point in time, commensurate, let's say, with his statistics and his ability. That's right.
And that's where I give the credit to the promoter in that area. I wish I knew who the promoter was for that. During
it was Paul. I guess it was Paul Jones.
Paul Jones. Okay. Yeah. And in Houston, Texas, Paul Bosch, the promoter down there, was really known for pushing a lot of black wrestlers. Some of those guys, they saw the money that could be made, and they were very good at promoting black wrestlers and Asian wrestlers and wrestlers of Hispanic descent, and they were very good at it. That's where I give the credit to the promoters. In some cases, the promoters just used their own racism, and they couldn't see beyond that. But in other cases, you had a lot of good promoters, like Paul Jones, like Paul Bosch. Even Vince McMahon Sr. used a lot of black female wrestlers at a time when black female wrestlers were rarely used anywhere.
With Paul Bosch, we're bringing that name up. One thing about Paul Bosch that to me is very impressive is that he was one of the few promoters who would use if a guy was in his eyes a star, and it could be from Mexico City, he could be from from anywhere, and he could be any race, and Paul Bosch would put him and push him. I mean, he would bring like an American promoter wouldn't bring, say, an El Santo or Mil Mascaras in and put him in the main event and put him over in the main event as the top babyface on the show, just because in their own mind they're not, they weren't Americans, and God, we see that today, right? And Paul Bosch drew sellouts with El Santo. I mean, Mil Mascaras, when Mil Mascaras would come up from Mexico to work Houston, Texas, just as an example, he was always in the main event, and he always drew, as opposed to other cities where, they would, you could say, yeah, well, Houston had a lot of Mexican fans, and that's part of the reason, but there's a lot of cities with a lot of Mexican fans today, where WCW, and WWF for that matter, will not, they will not market to that audience. Paul Bosch marketed Yeah, I mean, if you were a star in Mexico, he didn't just look down on you and go, that's Mexico, it means nothing here. He would take you and go, this guy is a superstar in Mexico, and the American fans would go, hey, he's a superstar in Mexico, he must be good, and the guy drew money on top with all audiences.
That's a very good point, Dave, and that's why I give the credit to those promoters who weren't so myopic in their own thinking when they were programming for large audiences of people. I've heard many great stories about Paul Bosch and other promoters, as well as I've heard some horror stories about various promoters, but that's a very good point, Dave.
I want to get to a couple of emails. One actually intrigued me. This is from Jackson, who said, is there any chance the WWF will have Chris Jericho be the guy who hit Austin? You know, I never thought of that. Jericho is going nowhere fast, although if they don't do something quick, he's going to die in the mid-card, although I'm sure that's what X-Pac and Road Dogg have in mind.
Did we ask the question about the legalities if maybe Benoit did it?
There is no legality. They could say it if they want.
Because he would have been in the other company at the time.
He would have been in the other company at the time, but you could do it. There's no reason that you couldn't. There's no legality against it. This is from Charles Parker, who says, I was listening to the show, and during the commercial break, I heard the guys from the Skybox making jokes about the difference between the NFL and the XFL. The joke was, in the XFL, using a knife would be encouraged, as opposed to the NFL, where choke slams are illegal. I think that Vince has a larger image problem to overcome than I previously thought. Yeah. Vince has an image problem a little bit. This is from Blair, who says, I think that if a wrestler is injured and is medically unable to perform for the company, his or her pay should be cut in half. If I'm a promoter paying for the services of an individual, and if that performer can't do the job, he shouldn't receive full pay for doing nothing. On the other hand, if a wrestler is involved in any way on television, doing run-ins, cutting promos, or participating in an on-camera role, he or she should certainly receive full pay because the wrestler is performing for the company. I would also think a wrestler should receive full pay while injured if they are doing off-camera promo work or doing appearances representing the company. The bottom line is, if the wrestler is working for the company, limited or not, they should receive their full pay. If they're sitting at home collecting a check, why should they get their payment in full? What's the motivation for coming back to work, especially if you work in a company like WCW? Well, part of that's WCW's fault for having no motivation for guys to come back to work. I would say that there might be an argument if you have a guy who, let's say a guy is injured. And I mean, now if you're in a wheelchair injured, I would say this is not an argument. But if you're injured, like, you've got let's say a torn rotator cuff like Ric Flair. Okay, it's like, you can't wrestle, and you're not going to be able to wrestle for a couple of months, and they don't want to put you on TV because you can't wrestle, and they ask you to go and do autograph signings. Let's say that the surgery was on your bad hand and not the hand you write with, because if it was on the hand you write with, then that's something else too. And you say, no, I don't feel like doing any stuff for the company. I can see the point. But, if you say, no, I'm not going to do something. But, I mean, if you're, a good employee who's willing to come to TV to cut promos. I mean, just an example, like the Conan example, or even the Bret Hart example of a guy who's, they're on TV. I mean, they can't wrestle in a match, but they're on TV and they're going there. I mean, and even if they're off a show, like Flair was, like Hart was, I mean, they were off shows because the bookers didn't tell them to come. I mean, it wasn't like they said, they called them up and go, we want you to do this show, we want you to do these dates, and they just go, no, I'm hurt, I'm not coming to TV just to do a promo. Now then, then there's an argument.
Did Flair get his pay cut?
I don't believe so. Because I don't think he was injured for long enough. I think that they don't do it for the first 90 days.
90, yeah.
So that's why.
Well, the least they owe Flair is to let him get his money with all they've done to him over the past couple of years. Dave, hey, Brian, I'm from South Carolina. I grew up in Jim Crockett Mid-Atlantic territory. Ric Flair is a god to me and millions of other fans. He is.
And you have seen them try to make him mortal for how many years now?
I have seen them make
less than mortal
donkeys behind out of Ric Flair over the past several years.
Oh my God! And you were talking. We were talking before we went, Brian. Before we go, Brian. I mean, I know that you're too young to know about or to have lived through this, and actually I am too. But doesn't it Okay, doesn't it just like when you actually hear the stories about the 50s and even certainly the early 60s? I mean, things went on in wrestling, even in probably to an extent right now there's a lawsuit out there which tells you that things aren't exactly 100% now. And the minute that lawsuit came out, all of a sudden WCW started promoting an awful lot of people all over TV. I mean, the Cat became a main eventer, Booker T became a world champion, Stevie Ray became a color commentator, all at once. But
Jones,
that is a very good point.
Jarrett.
Yeah, but I don't understand Miss Jones at all.
I'm sorry. What was that? What did Brian say?
Miss Jones became character.
He's right. You're right, Dave. Now, see, there in the art of war, you have to fight so that you try to win. If your opponent knows the way you're going to fight, you have to come in a different direction. With the lawsuit out there going, with other things out there going, I came in a different direction with my book, Black Stars of Professional Wrestling. And I think anyone who gets beyond the title and actually reads the book will see that it's really not a discourse, and it's not a vilification against any promoter or any booker or anyone who said American fans only want to watch American wrestlers. Nothing like that. It's really more or less a tribute to black professional wrestling from time immemorial, from the past on up to today. But you're exactly right. After this lawsuit, and I hope my little book helped to, in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But yeah, here's the Nitro Girl Chameleon. Now she's Miss Jones. Here's Charmel's Nitro Girl Storm. Now she's Paisley. Here's the Cat, who was a boob to Eric Bischoff. All of a sudden, he becomes the commissioner. So yeah, you guys are telling the truth.
Yeah, and total top babies. You were talking about, are there any, promoters? I'll throw out a name that when I was a kid, it was one of those things where almost never, and I'm sure you could, I know Rufus Jones worked the territory and all this, but Vern Gagne never promoted, virtually never promoted black wrestlers. There were almost never black wrestlers in that Minneapolis territory. And I think, Vern, there was a guy, I remember this now, that Tony Atlas went to the AWA. This would have been in the 80s already. And Tony Atlas got over really big, and then they basically jobbed him out, and Vern's thing when it was over was, well, we tried again, and these guys just can't get over in our territory. There were other, I'm sure there were other promoters like that, but I just remember, like, as a kid, AWA was a major league territory. Big money territory. And he had his idea of what a wrestler should be too, and somehow, I don't know.
Oh, yes. And I have absolute respect for Vern and his talent in the ring and what he accomplished with the AWA and as an amateur as well as a professional. But you're exactly right. I have made that point repeatedly, that the AWA never had a single black champion in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Ever.
They never did even the tag teams? Wow.
Not that I can recall. But you're right. Yeah, obviously,
I don't
get jobs.
I don't recall. But they would go long periods without even one black wrestler, and then occasionally they would have them, but they were never pushed as hard as like in some other places. Now, were there ever? I can tell. Just for me, when it comes to this, there was one thing that happened. This is in 1990. I was in Japan for a couple weeks, and I saw a lot of good wrestling in Japan. Flew in, actually got home about 1.5 hour before WCW Saturday Night started, so this is June 1990. Turn on the set, and it's Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, I forget whoever the heels were, and it was an angle with the Rocky King. I'm sure you, growing up there, you remember it. And one of them, I think it was Ole, I'm almost sure it was Ole, says, "We don't even want your kind, or where we come from, they don't even let your kind in." And I was just like, I remember I turned off the TV after seeing all that great wrestling in Japan for a week, and I just go, what? This is what our wrestling in our country still is in 1990. I was so mad. You have no idea.
It was like a culture shock, wasn't it, Dave?
Well, I just was surprised that they would do that, and I was just surprised that they would do that, because this was already after, at a point where stuff like that wasn't even happening in professional wrestling anymore, and I think Ole became a booker, and Ole went back to the 70s because that was the era he knew, and that's how he got heat, in the old Carolina territory. But here was 1990, I'm going like, you're kind and boy, and it's 1990, and I was like, huh.
Well, you got to remember, Dave, I'm from South Carolina. I routinely see Confederate flags around here. And Ole and those guys, that was the Mid-Atlantic Territory. Those guys traveled these roads, many years. So they figured that they knew the population and what they wanted here. Unlike, WWF and some other areas, different parts of the country, but these guys figured that that's what it took to get a character over, or to get heat for a character. And quiet as it is kept, it is still done today.
Yeah.
Last year, Buff Bagwell did a mockery of Ernest the Cat Miller where he came out in blackface. 2 years ago, the D-Generation X came out mocking the Nation of Domination in blackface, wearing Afro wigs and things like that. That's still going on right now. Jeff Jarrett, a Southern guy, a white guy from the South, will literally take a guitar and beat the hell out of a black woman on national television.
Well, didn't Jeff Jarrett call Booker T. Boy not all that long ago when he was beating him up like I forget which. There was a show within the last month or two.
He slammed the car door in his leg, I think.
When he slammed the car door on the pay-per-view, yeah.
Big Papa Pump used the term not long ago on either Nitro or Thunder in reference to Booker T. And I noticed that the production staff tried to blank it out. They missed it, though.
Well, Scott Steiner, it's
well, yeah, that's another character altogether.
Nobody knows what Scott Steiner's going to say anyway.
That's true. But I mean, look at. Okay, let's look at a subtle form of racism. Now, I am no fan of seeing men beat up women in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but we can routinely see white men beating the hell out of black women in professional wrestling. Kurt Hennig beat up Midnight, was punching her in her breast. Jeff Jarrett has clocked Jacqueline, Miss Jones, and every other black woman in sight, whereas you rarely see a black man do that to a white woman. You did see Rocky do a rock bottom on Stephanie McMahon. We did see the Good Father put a hoe through a table. We did see Viscera splash a hoe, but these white women were hoes and sluts, and not necessarily pure, pristine women. And these black women were getting beat down by these men. Jazz was beaten with a Singapore cane by Justin Credible on national television. TNN tried to blank it out, but, obviously that's what it was. That's the subtle thing.
Okay, well, the one thing, though, I'd say is I'm not sure how much of that is racist. There's a subtlety to it, but they beat up white women. There's a misogynistic element in wrestling, period, where these promoters have seen, for better or for worse, the reality is, we've all seen it, that seeing a guy beat up a girl, if it's not done ad nauseum, which it is now.
Which it is,
yeah. Which it is now. But the first time, I remember the first time I saw it, which was ECW, and I was going, oh my God. And the thing was, it was a 911 choke slamming Angel, and the pop was so loud, and it was like the beginning, and I remember watching it going like, this is the beginning of something that's going to be really bad, because everyone's going to pick it up, because the predominantly 18 to 30 male audience, for whatever reason, loves to see women abused on professional wrestling by guys. And Vince Russo caters to that. And it's not necessarily in that case, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a racial thing. There may be racial overtones to some of it, but it's more a misogynistic thing, I think.
Well, that's why I said I agree. It totally is misogynistic, but that's why I use the term subtle, Dave, because I think if we go back to the Dudley Boy thing in WWF, Devon was holding what's Alexandria York's name?
Terry Boatwright.
Terry. He was holding Terry by the hair, and he was threatening to punch her in the face. But he didn't. The black man never punched the white woman in the face. When Elliot Skipper grabbed Major Guns a couple of weeks ago on Lance Storm's orders, he didn't hurt her. That's what I'm saying. It's subtle that Jeff Jarrett can clock all these women, including white women too. But that's a more subtle thing. Now, and maybe it's a black thing,
We've got a full bank of phone calls. We're going to start with Chad in North Carolina. Chad, what's going on?
Not much, Dave. How's it going?
It's going really good.
First off, did you hear about Shawn Michaels' commentary on his website saying that he's as healthy as he's been in the last 2 years and maybe come back for one last match?
Yeah, we talked about that a couple days ago. We did hear that, yeah.
Do you think that's a shoot, or do you think it's just something to fool the internet smart?
I think he's messing with people.
You really do?
Yeah.
You think you? Well,
I mean, maybe someday, but it was more asking like he was trying to get, it was like he's trying to start something. He didn't say, I'm going to come back for a match. It was more like, what would you guys think? What do you think they'd think?
Oh yeah, please, Sean, come back.
Mm.
I mean, the thing with him, it's, well, you know what? If he came back, he probably, if it was only one match.
Awesome.
Yeah, he'd be awesome if it was only one match. I mean, if he was out there for 200 matches, he'd be a cripple by the end of the year. But, for one, I'm sure he could do one match if he wanted to. I mean, we talked to Steamboat. Steamboat still wants to come back for one last match with Flair.
Yeah. Did he say Flair or Austin at one of the Pillman shows?
I mean, I know I talked to him at one of the Pillman shows, and he said he would love to do one last match with Flair, but, just one, because his back is all messed up from all the years of... He had one real bad injury and just all the other injuries of 20 years of wrestling.
Mm. And one more thing, about Steve Austin, with the court up in the air and they're moving to TNN the 25th, do you think McMahon will still risk Austin coming back on U.S. On TNN and on the 25th, and then the next day the verdict come in that they're going back to USA?
Yeah. I think that Austin's going to debut on the 25th no matter what. I think that he has to, because he's going to be on the pay-per-view the 24th.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much there's no point in him. Once he's on the pay-per-view the 24th, there's no point in him not being on Raw the next day. I think they need to get whatever storyline they're going to do with Austin off the board. The timing... the 25th date in the TNN worked well because Austin was going to come back, to wrestle on October, I believe it's the 22nd, whatever that Sunday is of that week. And they were going to debut him on the pay-per-view without wrestling on this one coming up. So the timing worked out perfectly for all that. And I don't see, there's no reason to change it. They're just, that whole court thing, that's such a precarious thing right now.
Yeah. And one last final thing, with ECW starting 12 pay-per-views a year next year, do you think if they don't wind up on USA that they're basically screwed?
It's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, I'm sure they will get.
They did the pretty, they were pretty consistent before they had TNN.
Oh,
they weren't going every month though.
Yeah, with like the .2, no matter what.
Yeah, and that's really where they are now. They're still,
Yeah, the core ECW fan base.
Yeah. I mean, they're .15 to .22 pretty much every time out. They don't vary that much.
Yeah. All right, guys, that'll do it for now. All right, thanks, guys.
Okay, let's go to Todd. Todd, what's up?
Hi, Dave. How are you doing?
Very good.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Mr. Shabazz. How are you guys doing?
Hey.
I have two quick questions for Mr. Shabazz, and I have a quick question for you, Dave.
Sure.
Mr. Shabazz, the first thing I was asking about is what do you think of Booker T since he's been named the world champion of WCW?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing Todd.
Oh, he was just asking, what do you think of Booker T since they gave him the title belt?
As far as his in-ring performance, or?
No, as far as the way he's been characterized.
The characterization of Booker T.
Okay. I always think he has performed pretty much the same way he always has. He gives high energy. He gives 100% in the ring. I don't necessarily like the bookend. I don't like some of the Rocky-like mannerisms. I don't think it was necessary because, in my view, Booker was over to a degree long before Rocky. So I kind of don't necessarily like the way he was presented. I'm glad he got the opportunity, and I hope he'll get it again.
I think as far as a portrayal, it's, again, I'm comparing with 80s and 90s. And I think the portrayal of, Dwayne Johnson and Booker T is and certainly Dwayne Johnson, quite frankly, to most people is not even a racial character. I mean, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They don't even think of it. With Booker T, I don't think people think of it anyway, because in all sports, I mean, the days of I think the generation of people like, where like the Boston Celtic fans loved all those championships, but they never fully accepted Bill Russell. I think those days are long over. I mean, certainly Michael Jordan would be no more popular. It could be no more popular if he was white. And even like today with Ali, not necessarily Ali in his day, but certainly Ali as people think of him today, it really wouldn't matter. I think that to the fan base now, the racism, I'm not saying that we're a perfect world, but I think the fan base isn't really racist except for a minority now. Maybe I'm stupid when I say that.
No, you're not.
But,
no, you're not.
Okay.
You're right on point.
But I mean, it really was, only until, God, the last couple of years, and maybe even less than that. I wouldn't even say the last couple of years, because, God, Mark Henry's portrayal in the WWF even, and that was only a year ago. So there have been, I think that this year has been a better year as far as portraying characters without the racial mannerisms. I mean, the Booker T copying of The Rock, I think, is more just they're trying to get him to copy The Rock. It's not like it's a black thing like when we were younger and they did the shuffle and the headbutts and all that. If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the bull rope matches and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I agree with you totally, Dave, because that's what I said. I said that personally to Booker, and I said that to me. I've written that in articles. I think it was the fan base that really pushed Russo and the crew over there to finally giving Booker T a chance to run with the title, because those geniuses, for some reason, decided to turn him into G.I. Bro. And when he turned into G.I. Bro,
we were just saying there hadn't been anything. There you go.
Well, the fan base reacted negatively, because even if he had been G.I. Bill, maybe, but the use of that term bro was a racial term that wasn't really necessary for his character. He could have been worn with army fatigues, I thought, but I mean,
that gimmick wasn't necessary.
What offended people. I'm sorry.
The thing is, really though, the fan base has accepted it. Yet we had the whispers. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, that's the reason they switched the title, was those whispers. And it's not from the fans, but it was from Kevin Nash that he doesn't really get the pop he's supposed to, and they took the title off of him the very next week after that stuff started happening. But what was it? As far as the making him the champion, I mean, it really. I just keep thinking, because of the time frame and what they did. I think it wasn't so much. I think the public I think a lot of the people liked it. It was something good at the time, but at the same time, I think it was done for the
G.I. Bro or giving him the title.
Giving him the title, I think that was done for the lawsuit. G.I. Bro, I don't know what G.I. Bro was for. That's beyond me.
Well, I'm with you, Dave. I couldn't figure out for the life of me why, if you have a racial discrimination lawsuit, why you would do that G.I. Bro character.
Yeah.
I could find no logic in that.
Well, they did the whole deal about, he used to be G.I. Bro, and it was like, well, yeah, that was God knows how long ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah, longer than that even. But
yeah, even longer. Yeah, I mean, who cares?
In Texas, when he was first broke in, and that was
a totally different time frame.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I answered the caller's question. I really like Booker's performance in the ring. I hope he gets another chance. I agree with you, Dave. I think the fans have always accepted him. They accepted the Harlem Heat when they were heel characters, because Booker gave 100%. And I don't think it was time to give the title to a black guy because we haven't done it since '92. No, that's not the thing. I think the fans have always responded to him because he gives 100%. I respond to Big Vito. I'm a mark for Big Vito. I like him. I like all characters out there who impress me. And it's not about race.
Todd, is there anything else?
Can I just make a quick comment there? Because sure. I have my own opinion of it as well, and I'm not necessarily with you guys completely on that, because I think that in giving Booker T the belt, that there wasn't anything there, because the guy was as over as a character and as athletic and good of a wrestler as there was. But what bothered me in terms of the Booker T, in terms of turning him to the Rock with the shirts the same and the same finishing maneuver and the catchphrases, is it seemed like while the Rock was it was obviously they were copying the Rock character, not a black personification. I don't think they would have given that gimmick to a guy or something. And in that, I think it's sort of grouping him. They said, okay, here's a guy who's a lot different than The Rock. He's more of an aerial wrestler, Rockler. His charisma is a very different type of charisma than Rock. But they said, okay, because this guy is, and the only thing I can come up with is black, because that's the only reason that I can see them linking him to The Rock. Because there aren't that many. There are so many dissimilarities between them.
You're right. That is the only similarity between the two of them. is that one thing? You're right. You're right. And I have to say, as far as the thought process of giving him the Rock's gimmick instead of giving Kevin Nash the Rock's gimmick, or Sting the Rock's gimmick, I'm sure the way the minds there were thinking, you're right. I'm sure that's what it is. Because I couldn't imagine it being anything else.
My other question for Mr. Shabazz is whether he thinks that there is a way that the sort of the racism that's existing in pro wrestling, whether more inherent right now, not necessarily as overt, is ever going to be able to die short of a promotion run by, a black promoter.
Have we ever had like a black? I can't come up with. It's always been a run by white men. I can't think of a black promoter. There've been, Ernie Ladd is booked. There've been black bookers.
Yeah.
There's never been a major black promoter, has there?
I still had trouble hearing Todd. I thank him for his question, but it was what was the question totally?
Oh, it was basically a comment saying that he thinks that it may never go away unless we have until the day where we actually have a black promoter.
And even with a black promoter, he's going to do, if he's about making money, he's going to do what he thinks sells. Now, as a promoter, I can understand why they use some of those characters. Do I like seeing Eddie Guerrero doing a Cheech and Chong routine? Absolutely not. Do I like seeing Hispanics called filthy animals? Absolutely not. But I think promoters, their thing is to make money. And any promoter, if he's a black promoter, he's going to sell what he thinks will sell. I didn't necessarily like Vito and Johnny the Bull being inept hitmen, but because they were Italian. But I think that's one of the unfortunate things about it. And Todd is probably right. It probably won't go away to a degree. The difference in professional wrestling, well, look at tennis. Tennis is selling the Williams sisters. Golf is selling Tiger Woods. The NFL for years has been selling black wrestlers, as has the black athletes, as well as the NBA have been selling black ball players for years. I mean, they just don't say it as openly as professional wrestling probably does.
Anything else, Todd?
Yeah, one quick question for you. Now that Austin's back, do you think that the best route is face or turning him heel for The Rock at Mania?
I think it depends on
how long he's going to be around.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. If he's only going to be around till Mania, I think that he might as well go out with a face thing. If he's going to be around for like 2 years, I think, or a year, I think you could go with a heel run and then turn him back for a big farewell.
Why not turn Rock?
If you want, I wouldn't mess with that.
Well, they did that last time too.
Yeah, you can do it, but I just think Rock is a phenomenon, and I just wouldn't turn him. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah.
Hey Todd, Dave, can I say one more thing about that?
Sure, go ahead.
Hey Todd, I think you touched on something very important that has also struck me. I think one of the problems with Booker T is that he is a pure baby face in today's society, and it's extremely difficult to push a pure baby face because even Rocky, Goldberg, Austin, all of these guys, Triple H right now, who are getting a lot of cheers, they're still basically heel characters who fans seem to like. Kevin Nash did it for so many years.
Austin was the one everyone talked about.
Austin, yeah. I mean, no, I think that's one of the problems with Booker. He is a pure babyface in the traditional sense. He doesn't smoke. He curses no one out. He doesn't beat up any women. He's a good guy. I'm doing it for the fans. And that's got to be hard, to push.
Okay, well, I'll sign off. Thanks for your help with my email, Dave.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, take care, guys.
Okay. I want to make a mention of something before we hit the break. It's in your book a little bit about a guy named Luther Lindsay, and I know that that's a name again. It's a wrestler from the 50s and the 60s, and a lot of times when people talk about wrestling, they talk about the all-time greatest shooters, and you'll hear about like Karl Gotch or Luthez or whatever the names are. A lot of times you don't hear about Luther Lindsay, and Luther Lindsay had a rep. I mean, I remember people telling me stories about Luther Lindsay that he was right up there with any of them. I mean, he was taught, I guess, by Ruffy Silverstein, who was a great amateur wrestler turned pro, and I mean, an NCAA champion. And it wasn't that long into the training where Luther Lindsay was given a hurting to Ruffy Silverstein, and I don't know. I just want some of your comments as far as research you've done on Luther Lindsay.
Dave, I'm so glad you brought that up, because when I first started the project, I really wasn't sure how I'd be accepted being more or less an outsider trying to write about the business. But when I started the project, one of the first persons that contacted me was the great, legendary Lou Thez himself. And Lou Thez said to me, when writing about black wrestlers, do not forget Luther Lindsay, because he was one of the best. And when the champion Lou Thez says that Luther Lindsay is one of the best, I'll just defer to the champ.
Julian, why don't you tell everyone about how to get the book and other things that you've got? Because you actually have a lot of other things.
Yeah, the book is available worldwide at bookstores everywhere, particularly the bigger chains, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, stores like that. It's online, available at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. So it's really accessible. It's only $14.95, very economical. I haven't done Mick Foley type numbers yet, but I'm doing very well with the book, particularly being an independent producer.
Need to get someone to hit somebody with it on a TV show.
well, Brian, let me tell you this. I had a three-pronged approach in doing this project. First of all, I wanted to call attention to the subject matter that I felt had been overlooked for years and years and years, not only professional wrestling, but black professional wrestlers. And I wanted to do it similar to the book you did, Dave, Tributes, and not focus on negatives, but focus on the positives of these particular great athletes. Secondly, I wanted to do several national television shows to bring even more attention to the subject. And finally, I wanted to do a documentary similar to Wrestling with Shadows, or even similar to the Unreal Story on A&E, something that would be released on the home video market. I haven't completed number 3 yet. I'm still trying to get that put together. But, yeah, we've been able to really do something. And even though the book is called Black Star, the Professional Wrestling, and even though we know a lot of racism exists and sexism and misogynist attitudes are out there, what I wanted to do was really pay tribute to all of these black wrestlers, past and present. And so I haven't been able to get anyone to hit anyone over the head with it yet, Brian, because, I'm trying to be positive about everything. but what happens is people sometimes bring their own biases into the issue, but anyone who reads this book, they really will enjoy it, and they really will get a lot of background information that they didn't know, like The Godfather being a former McDonald's All-American basketball player, like Paisley being a legitimate beauty queen who won the Miss Black America. I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. I was going to tell people, I grew up with The Godfather.
Right.
He used to train at the gym right down the street from here, and we used to train. I never trained with Charles Wright, and I probably, which is actually funny, I've probably never said a word to Charles Wright in my life, but Charles Wright and I trained for like a couple of hours at the World's Gym in Campbell every morning. And the interesting thing is like his training partners and my training partners, and I were friends with him. It's just, he was just a big, quiet guy who was, and for those days, he was a big guy. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember. There were not a lot of guys who were.
Damn Dave Meltzer with his dirty heat that exposed the business.
I was already that Dave Meltzer, but he was nowhere. He was years away from being what was the original name that he had? Bear.
What was it?
I mean, he was years away from ever doing pro wrestling. I mean, he was doing. He was a very good college basketball player. I mean, not college, high school. He played. He was a star high school player in this area. And then he played college football. He went from like 190 to like 300 right before my eyes every morning.
Wow.
I ended up way over.
You had the wrong training partners, Dave.
My training partners got big too, but not quite that big. And then he moved to Vegas, and everyone knew him. He was bouncing in Vegas at Silver Dollar, I think it was the place. And all of a sudden, one day, one of the guys, who was actually his best friend for years, came up to me and just goes, Chuck's doing great in wrestling. He's in Japan. And I'm just going like, huh? And he's just going like, oh, yeah, he's doing great in wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I go, I watch New Japan Wrestling. He's pulling your leg. Yeah. And then and he didn't know the guy's name. And then all of a sudden, I put one and one together, and it was Soul Taker, which was his name at that period. And I had watched Soul Taker. I had seen him wrestle in Memphis, and because he'd gotten so much bigger, I never even knew it was the same person. I mean, it's just the truth. And
Great story, Dave.
I saw him, like probably 3-4 mornings a week all through college, because that was, was when I was in college, and he would have been in college, because we're basically the same age.
That is great. That is a great story.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to mention a couple things before we get back to the calls. MTV is already advertising WWF Sunday Night Heat on its website at MTV.com, despite no ruling yet. The previous page of Heat on the MTV site says that that Heat, starting when it goes to MTV, will be live from WWF New York in Times Square. The biggest stars in music and wrestling for the rowdiest party on the block. There'll be superstar interviews, highlights of TV, behind-the-scenes news, and music. So I get the feeling it may be a heavily taped-oriented shows with cut-ins going from WWF New York, as opposed to maybe they'll tape like 2 or 3 matches on these Thursdays rather than like more of a wrestling-type show as it sort of is now. So anyway, that's that. This says that this is from Nicholas Hecker, who says, when Jeff Jarrett came to the WWF in his very first, quote, shoot promo on Raw in Oklahoma City, he complained about being programmed with a black man who can't speak English. The last time he was in the WWF, which was his program with Ahmed Johnson. This is whatever happened to Panama Jack from the old UWF. Was that? I'm sure you mean Savannah Jack.
Savannah Jack, yeah, UWF.
Savannah Jack from UWF. He passed away many, many years ago.
Right.
Only a couple of years after that, he had done, in fact, this is like a name that no one really even talks about, but he had done a lot of steroids when he was younger, and I actually spoke to him several times before his death, and he had a really bad heart. In fact, he was needing a heart transplant, and he told me flat out that he knows it was from steroids.
Yeah.
His doctor told him, and he ended up dying of a heart attack. I think he was about 41 years old when he died.
That's right.
If I remember.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's go to... Actually, I want to read this because it's actually kind of interesting. It's from Dustin, who says, I was recently in a chat room and made a comment. This would have been a couple weeks ago when Booker T and Dwayne Johnson were both champions. The last time that there were 2 black world champions in the 2 promotions, the whole chat room started calling me an idiot, a blundering idiot, not just an idiot, a blundering idiot. I thought to myself, none of them believed that The Rock was black because they always pushed him as a Mavia. I was wondering what your opinions on why they brush his race under the rug. And they never exploited it, and I think that was his doing. I can't say they brushed it under the rug. I mean, they made it very clear that Rocky Johnson was his father. I mean, that has never been hidden. But
you're right, Dave. You're right. Oh my God! I know exactly what that guy's talking about being in that chat room. I have gotten heat with my book cover because I have Rocky prominently on the cover of the book, and I don't know why people have forgotten that Rocky Johnson was actually there at WrestleMania 13 in the ring with him. I don't know why. I don't know if having a black father and a Samoan mother makes you white or makes you something other than black. I don't know what it is. You know, I'm a black man, but this is the first time, Dave, I'm going to announce it to you right now. I'm a black man. That's the first time I've ever come out and publicly said I'm black. So what? All you have to do is meet me. You know, I mean, that is ridiculous. Practically, many of us are of mixed heritage. I mean, what difference does that make? I know exactly what that caller is talking about because I've had people look me straight in the eye and say, what are you talking about? The Rock is not black. Well, what is he? What kind of foolishness is that? You know, Halle Berry has a white mother. Everyone looking at that lady will call her a black woman. You know, I mean, what kind of foolishness is that?
Wow.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm getting excited now.
That's okay. That's okay. We're going to go to Charles in California. Charles, how you doing?
Hey, what's
Charles.
going on, Dave? What's going on, Brian? Mr. Shabazz, it is a pleasure to finally get a chance to speak with you.
Well, pleasure's all mine, Charles.
I've read your letters in the Observer, and it's a pleasure to get a chance to talk to another African-American gentleman around my age group that grew up in the same area. I grew up in Wilmington,
That's right. You're from the Carolinas. That's right.
Yeah. And watch the same stuff and kind of probably have the same sensibilities about, what's going on in the industry that we both love. I was listening to some of the other calls and some of the other comments, and I think part of the success of Dwayne Johnson, though, is that he was not stereotypically booked or written as a black character, which is, I think, part of the problem with maybe 90% of the rest of the non-white characters in the industry. They're stereotypically booked and written as ethnic characters. And I think if you have good story-driven and character-driven entertainment, race becomes secondary. And I think that's something that probably needs to happen a little bit more in the industry. Just, guys that are Hispanic, Samoan, Asian, whatever, but not being booked stereotypically in that way and using them in non-traditional roles.
Right.
And I see the same thing go on in, almost every aspect of escapism entertainment medium, whether you're talking, TV shows, sitcoms, comic books, whatever the case, over the years, most of the times when ethnic characters come up, they're horror because it's some white guy writing what he thinks a black, Hispanic, or Asian character is.
Charles, where are you from again?
I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. I live in Los
okay.
Angeles right now. And I'd love to, after the phone call, if it's at all possible when we're off the air, exchange information with you, because I'd love to talk to you about a lot of this stuff further.
Charles, you got email?
Yes, I most certainly do.
My email is awesomerecords@yahoo.com.
Give that to me one more time.
awesomerecords@yahoo.com.
Awesome spelled like the guy in the leisure suits.
Yeah, that's right. Good point.
Fantastic.
Like another badly bad character in wrestling that has nothing to do with race.
Well, hey, Charles.
Yes, sir.
You probably remember, then I know you remember back in '92. Well, Ron Simmons and Butch Reed were doomed with Teddy Long.
Exactly, yes.
And then when Ron was getting his push by the legendary cowboy Bill Watts, great person of race relations that he was, he decided to push Ron Simmons, and I know you remember this as the All-American Ron Simmons.
Exactly.
They downplayed his racial background and played up his athletic background. Now, I'm not saying Ron didn't deserve the push, because he absolutely did.
Yes.
But that's the exact point you're making with Rocky. They just didn't play on race as they did with Simmons and, like you said, 90% of all of the other characters of any ethnicity.
Yeah, and Bill Watts took a lot of heat for that, because everybody tried to say, well, he's just trying to recreate the Junkyard Dog. But
he was, though.
That has
he really was.
He was, but he knew that JYD made a lot of money, as Savannah Jack did for him also.
Yeah.
He had made millions of dollars with black wrestlers now.
Well,
he knew
I heard
black
Bill Watts
wrestlers
in an interview say that, he was talking to some promoter, and he had Ernie Ladd sitting next to him, and the guy said, well, part of the problem here is that you've got too many black faces out there, and Ernie Ladd says, yeah, but the money's green.
Ernie Ladd was Bill Watts' booker who, convinced him, I think, to go with JYD. And the other thing that people don't remember is JYD had very similar to a Goldberg push in that he beat a lot of guys quick. Not the 1 minute thing like Goldberg, but I mean, it was real important they felt it was real important not to beat JYD in certain cities. It was just, they just really protected him a lot. And they protected him also because 80% of the time they had real good workers with him, because one time they booked him in the feud with Kamala, who was not a good worker, and JYD lost a lot of steam during that period, because I remember some of those matches, they would just sit there and do nothing. He didn't have Ted DiBiase or somebody like that who was I would say was probably Orndorff. Those were his best opponents, because they were great workers. And they did the Terry Funk thing, which was when you wrestle JYD, you work a circle around him and just let him stand there and give the illusion he's moving.
Mr. Shabazz, I wanted to get your opinion on this, because growing up in the Carolinas in the 70s, I know for myself, during that time period, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, was like a superhero for us as, young African-American kids. And part of his charm or charisma during that time period was basically his interview cadence was kind of stereotypically black. He was kind of doing, a lot of people say it was some of it was Superstar Graham, but to me it was more Thunderbolt Patterson.
And Ali, too. He did a lot of Ali, too.
Superstar Graham, Superstar Graham influenced a lot of people. But Charles, oh man, you hit the nail on the head right there, Charles. Yeah. I have said that's what I call the Elvis Presley syndrome.
Yes. Thank you.
And it's real. And you're right, Charles. Dusty was, hey, man, I still have a cup here that I got at McDonald's with Dusty on it, with one with Nikita Koloff.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, the bull of the wool, I mean, Dusty could do it.
Oh,
who
man,
could pump more jive better than
every Monday what Dusty did or what Dusty said this weekend. Now, but as an adult and looking back on it, and I look at, the success that Dusty had, and the lack thereof for Thunderbolt, do you think Thunderbolt kind of got a bad deal out of that? Because I guess one of my pet peeves at this point is when you take the good aspects of another person's culture and you use them and you achieve tremendous success. But, you know, I know a lot of old entertainers who, you know, they sold their publishing rights in their music and stuff, and, you know, they're not living too well. And a lot of people are living very well, basically off of what they did and what they created. And I kind of look at that in a similar vein. What do you think about that?
I agree with you 100%. We have the same opinion of that. I did grow up with Dusty, and as I got older, you know, I kind of looked on it a little bit different. But, hey, Dusty, even though he was the booker at the time, you know, yeah, he was a hero of mine, too. I love seeing him going at it with Flair and Wahoo McDaniel and all of those guys. But, yeah, Thunderbolt Patterson, I think Thunderbolt's on personal demeanor probably held Thunderbolt back in many cases. Thunderbolt did try to unionize professional wrestlers, like Jesse the Body talked about it in the 80s. Thunderbolt actually did try to do it back in the 70s with Alpha the Samoan and several other people who worked with him at the time. But guys like JYD, Tony Atlas, today Rocky, Booker T, certain guys are going to succeed regardless to whatever obstacles they are faced. And then you have certain guys like Thunderbolt Patterson, like Bearcat Wright, who are really proud individuals and may have a certain demeanor that they're just not going to take certain things. And then you always have, right now, in rap music, you have Eminem, you have Kid Rock. The Elvis syndrome lives in every particular genre of sport, of everything in this particular culture. I'm not criticizing. I'm not talking bad about anyone. I'm just stating an obvious, well-known fact. Dave knows it's well-known. It's just rarely talked about. And Dusty did it. Ric Flair did it. Come on, man. Styling and profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun, hit stealing, wheeling and dealing. You know, all of that was jive talk. A couple of weeks ago, Vince Russo came out and called Ernest the Cat Miller Dolomite. Now, everyone who's familiar with black comedy knows that Dolomite is a character by Rudy Ray Moore, who I actually wrote a book about. Made me wonder if Russo was doing research on me. But, you know, I mean, because to hear some of these things, that's just, you know.
Only if he saw you in a movie last weekend.
Well, maybe so. Maybe so, because I could have been in there, you know. But, you know, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That is not a new concept, and it exists all over the place. And Dusty was just one of the masters at doing it. Jimmy Valiant did it later in his career.
Sure
Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan. Listen, if Hulk Hogan does an interview right now in 2000, every other word he says is going to be brother or dude. He still sounds like a black guy from the movies in the 70s.
Yep. The problem is that like it's so dated now.
Yes.
I mean, he's doing somebody else's, like, you know, that should be urban slang. I mean, like, you know, because Conan is today's urban slang, and
right.
And a lot of the other guys in it for years.
Not to cut you off, Dave, but I maybe I have a personal bias here, but I give Conan a lot of credit for making that. I mean, Nash was always going to get that female demographic, but when they had Conan in the Wolfpack next to Nash, and Nash is wearing the FUBU wear, and, you know, doing the urban slang, and even the Big Papa now, he wants to, you know, do little takeoffs off of rap CDs and almost every promo he cuts. To me, that goes a long way to getting those guys over.
Yeah, well, I mean, Steiner, the whole thing is that, like, they have, I think Nash probably feeds him his lines.
Yeah.
For the most part. I mean, that's the truth. That's the truth. You know, he kind of like, because that way they kind of protect each other's back, so to speak, and you know, they're good friends and everything. But but yeah, I think it's always been, I wouldn't say in every territory, but it's always been like that kind of black slang influenced the white wrestlers, because the whole thing is you've got to be inner city hip. You know, I think is always the feeling, because wrestling was always. You know, it's only until recently that it was a big suburbs thing. It used to really be the inner city thing, you know, like whether it was in New York or Miami. It was kind of like that was the kind of fan base that they were appealing to.
Interesting. Well, last question, I guess, Mr. Shabazz. What is your opinion right now on the way, I guess, a lot of the African American as well as other ethnic wrestlers are being used, you know, with the lawsuit and everything? You see a lot of guys getting the push in WCW, and even to a lesser degree, maybe in the WWF. I kind of one that I like, other than Dwayne Johnson, who is the best example, but I like Jonathan Coachman too. He's in a non-traditional role for a black guy. You know, he's doing interviews and he's not really doing it. Okay, the question I was asking Mr. Shabazz is, what did he think of, I guess, overall the use of the black as well as other ethnic entertainers in the industry today? One example I was looking at was I like Jonathan Coachman in the WWF because he's in a non-traditional role. He's doing interviews, and he's not being really cast in a stereotypically black way in any manner.
In any way. That's right. I agree with you on that one.
That's a very good point about Jonathan Coachman. I agree totally. I'm glad to see it. I am glad that at least at the major level now, what we see on television, the guys are making very good money. At least some of them are on the major levels, and at least many of them are getting publicity in ways that they would not have gotten it before. I still don't see as much changes in terms of the characterizations as I would like to see. I mentioned earlier Eddie Guerrero doing the Cheech and Chong thing, the Big Vito and Johnny the Bull being inept hitmen for the mafia. I don't necessarily like all the racial stereotypes. I absolutely hated hearing about West Texas rednecks and things like that. But the black wrestlers, I'm glad to see them out there. I'm glad to see them making some money. I'm a fan. I'm going to be a fan regardless, and I'll probably sit back and complain about the things I don't like. But the difference is, Charles, like you, I have a passion for these athletes. I respect them so much, and for what they have done, not only in my life, in my children's life, in my parents' life. I love what they do, and I have so much respect for them. That's why my book, Black Stars of Professional Wrestling, came out. It was born out of love for these black wrestlers. JYD and Bobo Brazil passed away in 1998. That's why I wrote the book, because I didn't like the way the mainstream media covered their passings. That was the impetus for the book. I'm glad to see Rocky doing what he's doing. I'm glad to see Coachman. I'm glad that Vince is willing to use black wrestlers, and even over in WCW, even if you have to push them with lawsuits and whatever you have to do, at least they're giving them the shot. And I really like that. I didn't like the Mexicans losing their mask, but at least they're giving them a shot.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that, especially luchador and luchador tradition. I think Ray really suffered when they took the mask off. Well, I guess that's all for now. There's a lot of other stuff
Charles.
I could talk about. Definitely be corresponding with you.
Pleasure talking to you, Charles. Pleasure, man.
I've got some more stories for you, so you'll be hearing from me.
I'm going to be updating this book, so keep the stories coming.
Okay. Fantastic.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Charles. Okay, we're gonna get some more calls in just a second. I just want to make a couple of comments from the emails. This is from Anthony Evans, who's a boxing writer, sports writer in England, who says, I find myself agreeing with many of the points raised tonight, but how come Julian, Brian, and yourself have not mentioned characters like Lord Al Hayes and Steven Regal? Are they totally racist, stereotyped English characters? Personally, I don't find offense in them, and I've been waiting for years for WWF to give Davey Boy Smith an English football thug gimmick, but a lot of my friends do. I used to not like the tea and the crumpet stuff with Regal.
Right. Yeah.
For the same reason that I didn't like the tequila bottle on the pole stuff. And,
right.
You know, even though Regal plays it very well, it's almost like to me with Regal, I didn't mind the Lord. You know, the Lord stuff in the Blue Blood at all.
Right.
But the
it's almost a waste.
Yeah, but the tea stuff for some reason that
went over the line. That was more stereotyping.
Yeah, and also to me it was also like a lack of creativity in that, okay, we have a guy from England, okay, and we have and what we're going to have is like, you know, you were talking about how Charles especially was talking about, this is how the white man views a black man, and this is what his role should be.
Right.
And it's like, this is what a white American views the world of England, that they're you know, a bunch of guys who drink tea and, you know, talk funny. And making fun of that for comedy. And they walk funny and they're kind of pussies and stuff, even though, you know, everyone knows Steve Regal's probably a pretty damn tough guy.
Right.
But, let's see. This is also from Chris, who says, I wonder what Julian thinks about the most horrible gimmick ever played by a white guy. Actually, I don't think this was the most horrible gimmick, but it was something, and that was Akeem the African Dream.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Oh, yes. Oh, with Slick as his manager. Now, you look at Too Cool today, Akeem really did go way beyond what they did with... I thought they were going to do the same thing with Too Cool, but they didn't go quite as far.
But yeah, with Slick as his manager and wearing the African dashikis, it wasn't no one but the one-man gang. Oh man, that blew me away.
Yeah. A couple of people have brought this up, and that is as far as Steve Austin. Brian, this is actually a pretty damn good idea. They may have even thought of it. For Austin, how about Shawn Michaels? You know, Steve Austin had the last match of Shawn Michaels' career. If Shawn Michaels is going to come back for one match, it should be at WrestleMania, and it should be in a featured thing. And Austin would be a good guy to have it with, and to put Austin over again.
But when you really think about it, though, okay, you'd have Shawn Michaels hit Austin, and then Shawn Michaels is going to come back to do another job for Steve Austin.
It should only be one. They only need to do one, just one match, get it over with. It's got to be at WrestleMania. To me, if you don't even do it at WrestleMania, it's a good thing you put. I take that one back because I really think that Rock and Austin should be the main event at Mania. Maybe they could do it at Royal Rumble. No, because Austin would have to win Royal Rumble to get the shot at Rock, unless Austin wins the title.
No, they don't even do that anymore. It doesn't even matter.
Okay.
Remember that year Vince won? Last year, wasn't it?
Yeah. Not this last year, but the year before.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Let's go to Darren in Michigan. Darren, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing, Dave? I tell you this now, man. You all touched on a lot of subjects, which kind of made me upset. I have a couple issues that I wanted to talk about, but I want to correct a couple of people. With Ty, Booker T was wearing the outfit and stuff before The Rock did because Booker T came out first, but The Rock, since he was pushed more prominently, this is what we have now. And with Jonathan Coachman, I knew him from Kansas City. I just moved up here from Michigan from Kansas City when he was broadcaster for KNBC 9 News, and he had met Shawn Michaels and a few other people from the WWF. That's why he got his position. Hopefully within the next month I'll be with the WWF as well. So you all keep your fingers crossed. But what I want to know is why has Hulk Hogan, I guess, never faced a black wrestler besides Tiny Lister? And I'm assuming he only faced Tiny Lister.
Kamala.
Oh, okay. Well, because because he had me thinking that he didn't like black wrestlers. Because I know in the shoot, Tiny Lister would probably kick Hogan's ass. And
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter though.
Yeah, well, I understand, but but. Okay, let's say, for instance, Vince Russo and what he's doing with Booker T. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but me being a black man, don't hate the play, hate the game, and say the drama for your mama. Those are black terms. I mean, that's black slang right there. That's ebonics. Unless he has some hidden motivation, Booker T should not be doing that, because that right there is racist and stereotypical as you get. And nothing doing compared to The Rock, because The Rock don't use. If you smell what The Rock is cooking, you've never heard a black man say that before. And what he has Booker T doing and coming out, and that's too much comparison for The Rock. And I saw Mr. Shabazz when he was on BET, and he asked Booker T about what's the best company to work in, and I mean, you have to be a fool to not recognize that the WWF is the #1 promotion. Granted, he may be sent it to keep his job or whatnot, or because he was promised a title, but I mean, and Kevin Nash talking about Booker T. He's not getting a pop. Well, you can't get a pop if there's only 1,200 people in there, in the arena. I mean, if
Kevin Nash is clever though.
What's that?
You can if all 1,200 care.
Yeah, there's no way that that he's gonna get. I mean, Kevin Nash can't even get a pop like The Rock. I mean, I'm trying to figure out who's fooling who, and to me, Vince Russo.
Kevin Nash is fooling all of them.
Yeah, but you know what though? But see, that makes Vince Russo not only idiot but also a pussy. Because if he's in charge and he can't control the asylum, then when he loses the job, it's not a matter of if, but it's when. When he loses the job, I don't know.
And brother.
Said a mouthful.
Brother,
yeah.
How did you know about the show on BET? Was there publicity about it?
Nah, and that's the funny thing about Bob Ryder or them always talking about how how they need to promote. Okay, but I mean, I just happen to watch Tavis Smiley every night.
Right.
And so I saw it. I'm looking like, damn, what happened? Because I know Tavis doesn't doesn't.
And
watch
everybody and their mother knew that Rocky was going to be at the Republican convention. Everybody and their mother knows that China's going to be on the cover of Playboy even before it comes out. They promote their champions. Another thing that has held Booker back, they just do not promote. They don't.
make their champions household names. Goldberg kind of is an exception, but they really don't go out and actively promote their people to the mainstream in the right way, like
Can I tell you something
does.
Can I tell you something about Goldberg, which is a real interesting thing? Because Goldberg's mainstream media success, to me, had very little to do with WCW.
Right.
And it had to do with the fluke.
Exactly.
That
He
so
was a
many...
rip-off of Austin.
No, it's no. He could have been 10 times bigger than Austin mainstream media, and the reason is, and he was for a while there, and the reason is because of the unique thing of there are so many newspaper editors and so many people who have a lot of power in television news that are Jewish, and the idea to them of a news story is this the Jewish stereotype is something, unathletic and certainly not a 290-pound, guy who looks like Bill Goldberg beating people up. And it was such a great news story to so many people. That's where Bill Goldberg got over mainstream, bigger than Austin, as far as Austin never got front page stories in the newspaper. Goldberg got him in many newspapers, even though Austin was a bigger star in wrestling.
And that is the point. That is the fact. Goldberg's success was absent of WCW in terms of the mainstream. That is an absolute fact. And when you had Booker T, you had Ernest the Cat, you had Charmel, who's legitimately a former Miss Black America, on a national television program, and you did not promote it. It was a milestone just to have black people talking about black professional wrestlers on national television. Sure. That was a milestone. But they did not lift a finger to promote it, and in their magazine, WCW, they totally ignored me.
Now, what I would like,
and I'm mad about that.
Now, what I want to know is why is it that, you have Booker T now. Granted, I know Booker T's loyal, but there's no way. And that's just because I got a degree in journalism. There's no way Booker T will ever be as big as The Rock with the type of promotion and the type of direction that WCW has. There's just no way. Obviously Vince McMahon is a marketing machine, and that's why I'm trying to work there. But there's just no way.
Don't forget to send him.
I don't have to. I got a letter of recommendation from the President of the United States. That's all I need. But, hey, you all laugh, but I'm dead serious. Why WCW? You have Mark Madden trying to use these Cisco references and trying to speak slang. And he said a comment the other day to me which was a racist comment, had nothing to do with Lou Thesz and nothing like that. But he made a comment in one of the matches, and I have to probably call you tomorrow and look at the tape again and tell you what it was.
Darren, we got to get running because we're totally out of time.
Yeah.
And Julian, we got to get you back on in a couple of weeks and finish this up because there's a lot more to talk about on this subject. And we are not going to be here tomorrow. I just want to let anyone know it's a tape with Stan Lane. And Monday, we're going to be back with Jim Cornette, which should be another very lively discussion of a totally different order. So anyway, Brian, I want to thank you, and Julian, I want to thank you very much, and we'll see you on Monday after the WCW pay-per-view.